first thing I noticed wasn't the house itself. It was the sound of the wind chime my mother hung by the porch years ago. It used to ring softly when she opened the door to call me for dinner, but now the sound felt different, thinner, like it was warning me to turn around. The taxi idled behind me, engine humming as I stood at the gate of the house I grew up in, suitcase by my feet and my key, cool and sharp between my fingers. It should have felt like coming home, but it didn't. The front door, once painted the color of sunrise because Mom said she wanted mornings to start cheerful, now looked dull and gray. Still, I forced myself forward. I'd been gone long enough to build a life that didn't depend on this place, but I came back to settle my mother's estate, to make peace, and maybe to remind my stepfather that I still existed. When the key didn't turn, I thought I made a mistake. I tried again, slower this time, jiggling it the way Mom used to when the lock stuck in winter. Nothing. The metal teeth scraped uselessly. That's when I realized it wasn't jammed. It had been changed. I stood there, my reflection faint in the glass panel beside the door, my face overlapping with the faint outline of my mother's welcome mat that still read "Home is where love lives." Something about that made me laugh, quiet and bitter. I knocked. No answer. Then I heard footsteps, heavy ones, crossing the floorboards I used to tiptoe across. The door swung open, and there he was, my stepfather, half-dressed in his worn flannel shirt, his expression a mixture of mock surprise and irritation. "Well, look who decided to come back," he said, leaning on the frame like I was a stranger at his doorstep. His voice hadn't changed. Still the same mix of sugar and poison. "You could have called. Didn't expect guests this morning." "I didn't think I had to call to come home," I said, lifting the useless key in front of me. His eyes flicked to it and then back to me, narrowing. For a second, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with all the words we'd never said after my mother's funeral, how he'd claimed everything was handled, how I'd left with just a suitcase because I couldn't breathe in this house anymore. He forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Things change, locks too. Come on in anyway," he said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. I hesitated, but I walked in. The air smelled the same, like lemon polish and dust, but underneath it was something metallic, old. My chest tightened. Every picture of Mom was gone from the hallway wall, replaced with framed certificates of his construction business. It was like he'd renovated her out of existence. "Coffee?" he asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I didn't know you were back in the country. How long you staying?" His tone was light, too light, like he was performing small talk for an invisible audience. "Just long enough to finish what Mom started," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He paused, his back still turned. "Meaning?" "Her estate, her will, the one you said the lawyer lost." He turned around slowly, eyes sharp now, mouth tightening. "You shouldn't stir up old matters. Everything was taken care of." "Was it?" I asked. That's when the smile fell away. He crossed the distance between us in 2 quick strides, his hand gripping my shoulder hard enough to make me flinch. "Don't come into my house accusing me of anything," he said, his voice low and trembling with contained rage. I looked down at his hand. "Your house?" I asked softly. "Funny, Mom's name was still on the deed when I left." Something in his face snapped. The shove came fast, unexpected, more out of instinct than plan. My suitcase tipped over, spilling papers and clothes onto the floor. The corner of the coffee table caught my side hard, stealing my breath. For a second, the world blurred into noise, his voice, the thud, the ringing in my ears. Then the sound that cut through everything, a voice from the sidewalk. "Hey, you okay in there?" The front door was still half open. A neighbor, the same one who'd watched over me when I was little, stood by her fence, phone in hand. I didn't answer right away. I just looked up at him, my stepfather, who had frozen mid-step, realization dawning. His eyes darted to the open door, then to the phone camera pointed our way. "You shouldn't have come back," he said under his breath. I stood up slowly, pain shooting through my ribs, but my voice was steady. "You just gave me evidence," I said. Outside, the neighbor's voice was already firm, calling someone. Inside, he stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the scared kid who used to flinch when he raised his hand, but as someone who had just learned how to fight back without lifting a finger. I bent down, picked up the old brass key from the floor and slipped it into my pocket. It didn't open the door anymore, but it would open something else soon, something he couldn't lock me out of again. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of the chime outside kept swinging through my head like a pendulum, back and forth, counting down the hours until morning. My ribs ached from where the table caught me, but the bruises were what hurt the most. It was the disbelief that settled in like fog. You think, when you're older, that people will finally see the truth about someone like him. That time and distance will peel away the mask. But no, people still called him Mr. Reliable, the man who took care of everything after your mom passed. The kind of man who shows up at church early and stays late to stack chairs, who smiles too wide and shakes too long. The kind of man nobody believes could ever raise his hand to anyone, especially not his stepdaughter. I sat on the motel bed with the cheap floral comforter pulled over my knees, scrolling through my phone, rereading the message I'd drafted for hours. Has anyone ever been gaslit by family? When the truth sounds like revenge, but it's just proof. I didn't post it, not yet, but the thought of it made me breathe a little easier. Sometimes speaking into the void feels safer than trying to talk to real people who already decided what kind of story they want to hear. When I finally turned on the camera on my laptop, the screen's reflection caught the purple shadow forming along my collarbone. I came back home today, I began quietly, my voice trembling but not weak. He said welcome back, then reminded me why I left. I paused, forcing a smile that didn't match the ache in my chest. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have walked away? Or would you stay until the truth couldn't hide anymore? I hit record not for pity, but for proof. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence always works in their favor. I thought about calling the police, but I could already hear the questions. Are you sure he meant to push you? Were you maybe being confrontational? No one ever asks what it takes to survive people who know exactly how to hurt you without leaving marks. So instead, I decided to make a record my own way. I photographed everything, the bruise, the scratches on the coffee table, even the timestamp on my cab receipt. I saved them all in a folder labeled Homecoming. It was the only word that felt both honest and ironic enough to capture what just happened. Around sunrise, I found myself scrolling through old messages from my mom. The last one she'd sent said, "Be kind even when you're right." I used to think that was about forgiveness. Now I understood it differently. Kindness, real kindness, sometimes meant holding people accountable without cruelty. It meant letting truth do the talking instead of anger. That thought settled me. It gave me direction. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in a cafe downtown, nursing a cup of coffee I barely touched. I opened my notebook and began writing everything down while it was still fresh. The way he looked, what he said, the time, the neighbor's name. Documentation, not diary. My mother used to tell me that words are stronger when they're written, that paper has more patience than people. She wasn't wrong. I watched people move through the cafe, students, office workers, couples. Everyone looked normal, grounded, safe. For a moment, I envied that. Then I realized I wasn't here to envy anyone. I was here to rebuild control. Every bruise, every lie, every missing document, it all pointed toward something that could finally be proven. The truth wasn't a mystery. It was just buried under charm and paperwork. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You don't need revenge, you need receipts." The line sounded like something my mother might have said if she were still here. I smiled at the thought and wrote it down on the top of the page, underlined twice. My phone buzzed. An old friend, Jordan, who'd seen my half-posted story before I deleted it. "Are you okay?" they texted. "If you need a place or a lawyer, I know someone." That message hit like a small light breaking through the fog. I typed back, "Not yet, but soon." When I stepped outside, the morning sun hit my face and I caught my reflection in the cafe window. My eyes looked tired but steady. Beneath the pain was something else, a quiet, deliberate calm. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness, and I had started my own record. The wind picked up, brushing against the tiny brass key still in my pocket. I rubbed it between my fingers and looked back toward the street that led home. The locks might have changed, but the truth hadn't. And this time I wasn't leaving until it was written down, filed, and witnessed. The next morning I drove back to the house, not to go inside, but to see it from a distance, to remember what I was actually fighting for. From the outside, nothing looked different. The porch steps still creaked in the same place. The shutters still leaned slightly, like they were tired of pretending the house was stronger than it really was. But what struck me most was the faint smell of my mother's perfume drifting through the cracked window. It wasn't possible, I knew that. She'd been gone 2 years. But the scent, jasmine and laundry soap, hung in the air ghost-like, as if she had just walked through the hallway, humming the same tune she always did when she watered her plants. That smell anchored me. It made me remember why I'd come back, why I couldn't let my stepfather's version of closure be the final word. He tried to turn this house into his monument, repainting, rearranging, erasing. But no matter how hard he scrubbed, traces of her lingered. It wasn't just her perfume. It was the way the sunlight hit the kitchen window at exactly 10 a.m., the faint outline of her picture that still marked the wall where he'd taken it down. Memory is stubborn like that. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a while, holding the keychain my grandmother had given me before I left for college. It was my mother's old brass house key, smoothed by years of use. The metal had worn so much that you could barely make out the engraved heart on the top, but I could feel it under my thumb. The key didn't fit anymore, not in the lock, but it still belonged to me in another way. It wasn't about entry anymore, it was about proof. Proof that I once belonged there, that she meant for me too. As I sat there, I found myself remembering the night before my mother died. We were in her room. She was frail, but her voice was still steady. She told me she'd written everything down, her will, her wishes, even a letter. She said, "Don't let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home." I didn't understand then how serious she was. Now those words looped through my head like an unfinished sentence. I took out my notebook again, the same one from the cafe, and began to sketch the layout of the house from memory. I marked where Mom kept her safe, behind the linen closet, 3rd shelf down. I knew it had to be empty now. My stepfather had probably gone through it long ago. But still, I wrote it down. I also jotted down something Grandma had once said over tea. She didn't trust him fully. That's why she made copies. Copies. That word lit a spark somewhere inside me. If Mom had really made copies of her will, they had to be somewhere. And Grandma might know more than she realized. I watched as my stepfather's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out, talking loudly on his phone, laughing like nothing had happened the day before. It was surreal, how people can carry on as if they didn't just bruise someone's ribs, as if violence could be erased by pretending it never happened. I stayed low in my seat, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to waste energy on confrontation yet. Not until I had something in writing, something real. When he disappeared inside, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages until I found the old contact for my mother's attorney, Mr. Darden. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, but his name had stuck with me because he'd been kind in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. I typed a short message. "Hi, this is Anna. I believe my mother's estate paperwork might not have been filed correctly. Could we schedule a review?" I hit send before I could second-guess it. As I waited for a response, I let myself walk a few steps closer to the property line. My hand brushed against the mailbox, and I noticed something odd. The small brass label with Mom's name had been pried off, leaving a faint rectangular outline in the metal. He'd even tried to erase her name from the mail. That tiny, petty act filled me with a strange, calm anger. Not the kind that burns you alive, but the kind that fuels you slowly, deliberately. Then I saw it. A single dead flower stem poking through the dirt near the porch steps. My mother's old garden. She loved tulips. They never lasted long in the southern heat. But she planted them every year anyway. I knelt and brushed away some soil until I found the edge of something metallic beneath. A small key tag, rusted, attached to what looked like an old spare key. The tag had faded writing on it, but I could still make out part of it. B12. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't the house key, I knew that much. This one was smaller, smoother, meant for something secure but tucked away. A safe deposit box, maybe? My heart picked up. Grandma had once mentioned that number when she was talking about the paperwork your mother didn't trust him with. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, standing there with dirt under my fingernails and a rusted tag in my hand, it felt like the first breadcrumb she'd left me. I slipped the tag into my pocket next to the brass key and exhaled, slow and steady. 2 keys, 2 symbols, one that no longer opened my home, and one that might unlock the truth. I didn't know what I'd find in box B12, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was inside, my stepfather didn't want me to see it. As I turned to leave, the wind shifted again, carrying that faint trace of jasmine through the air. I looked back one last time at the house, the curtains drawn, the chimes still swaying lazily, and whispered to myself, "Mom, I think I found your way back." Then I walked toward my car, pocket heavy with keys, heart steady with purpose. When I pulled into Grandma's driveway later that afternoon, her curtains were already moving. She'd seen me coming from the window, the same one she used to wave through when I came home from school years ago. Her house hadn't changed much, except now it smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and something sweet, maybe vanilla pudding. It was smaller than I remembered, but safer. Quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't make you brace for footsteps or slammed doors. She opened the door before I even knocked. "You came," she said softly, her voice both a question and a relief. She looked smaller than before, her shoulders curved forward like she was carrying invisible weight, but her eyes, those sharp gray eyes, still missed nothing. "You're hurt," she said immediately, touching the side of my face where the bruise had started to fade. I shook my head, trying to brush it off, but her fingers lingered. "He did this, didn't he?" I didn't answer, and I didn't need to. She sighed, that deep, tired sigh of someone who's seen too much and been believed too little. "Come inside, we'll talk." The house was a museum of my childhood. Every framed photograph, every lace curtain, every teacup in its place. My mother's wedding photo was still there on the mantel, her smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. But standing next to her in that picture was him, my stepfather, his arm around her waist, his grin wide and sure. I couldn't look at that part of the photo anymore. We sat at the kitchen table. Grandma poured tea into chipped cups, the kind she refused to replace because old things remember kindness. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, it was patient. She waited for me to find my words. "I went to the house," I said finally. She nodded as if she'd expected that. "And the locks are changed. He's pretending everything is his now. I found this." I reached into my pocket and placed the small rusted key tag on the table. The faded B12 caught the afternoon light. Her hand froze halfway to her teacup. "Oh," she breathed. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. "You found it." "What is it, Grandma?" She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Your mother didn't trust him," she said quietly. "She loved him, maybe too much, but she wasn't blind. She made copies of her will and put them in a safe deposit box, Bank of Cumberland, Box B12. I was with her when she rented it. She said if anything ever happened to her, that box would tell the truth." I sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. "So he's been lying this whole time." Her lips pressed together, trembling. "I think he panicked after she died, told the lawyer the documents were missing, then pushed everything through before anyone could question it. He wanted control of the house, the money, her story." A bitter laugh slipped from me before I could stop it. "And everyone believed him." "People like that always make sure they look dependable," she said. "He had the right smile for it." We sat in silence again, but this time it was heavy. The kind that feels like something pressing on your chest. Grandma reached for my hand. Her skin was soft, paper-thin, but her grip was steady. "You can't let him rewrite what she left you. But promise me, whatever you do, do it the right way, quietly, legally. That's what she'd want." "I will," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, faint but proud. "That's my girl." Then she stood slowly, her knees creaking, and went to a drawer by the sink. She rummaged for a moment, then returned with a folded paper. "This is the rental slip for the box," she said, sliding it across the table. The date on it was 2 months before my mother passed. "She listed me as her witness. You might need it to access it." I stared at the signature, my mother's handwriting, neat, looping, unmistakably hers. It was the first real proof I'd touched. Not hearsay, not memory, paper, ink, legitimacy. "Grandma," I whispered, my throat tightening. "He said she didn't have time to finish her will." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed even. "He said a lot of things." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the back of my notebook. My heart was beating faster now, not out of fear, but resolve. I could almost feel my mother's voice under my skin, that calm firmness she had when she was right about something. Patience wins more wars than anger ever will. When I stood to leave, Grandma hugged me longer than usual. "He's not going to take this well," she murmured into my shoulder. "Men like him never do, but you're not a child anymore. You have your mother's quiet strength, and that's stronger than his temper." I nodded, holding on to her words as tightly as I held the small key tag in my hand. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon light caught the brass letters again, B12 glinting faintly like a secret waiting to be unlocked. I looked down the street toward the bank that sat at the edge of town, my pulse steady and sure. For the first time since I'd come home, I knew exactly what my next step was. I wasn't going back to that house, not yet. I was going to the bank. The next morning, I found Grandma already dressed when I came to pick her up. She was sitting by the window, her small handbag in her lap, wearing her Sunday hat even though it was Sunday. She looked like someone preparing for a courtroom rather than a bank. "You think they'll let me in without an appointment?" she asked, her voice a little shaky but determined. "They'll let you in," I said, holding the door open for her. "You're listed as witness on the form, that's more than enough." She gave me a quick, approving nod. "Good, then let's not waste time." The drive to the Bank of Cumberland was quiet except for the sound of the turn signal and the occasional hum of Grandma's breathing beside me. She held the rental slip in her hands like it was something sacred. I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye, half worried, half in awe. For all her fragility, she carried a steadiness that filled the car more than words could. When we arrived, I helped her out, and she looped her arm through mine. The bank was one of those old brick buildings that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The floors gleamed, and the tellers looked up as soon as we stepped in, offering polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. There's a certain tone people use when they see an elderly woman walking in with slow steps. They speak louder, slower, like age equals confusion. But Grandma met each gaze with quiet authority, chin lifted, eyes sharp. "We're here to access a deposit box," she told the young teller. "Box B12. It belonged to my late daughter." The teller blinked, then nodded. "Do you have documentation?" Grandma slid the rental slip across the counter with trembling fingers. "And I'm her witness," she added. "This is her daughter." She nodded toward me. I watched the teller's expression shift from polite efficiency to mild uncertainty. "I'll need to get a supervisor," she said, disappearing through a frosted glass door. While we waited, I noticed the reflection of the bank's glass doors behind us. For a second, I thought I saw my stepfather's shape, broad shoulders, that familiar stance. But when I turned, it was just a delivery driver walking past. My pulse eased, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The supervisor arrived, a man in his 50s with a silver tie clip and kind eyes. "You're here about box B12, he confirmed. "Yes," I said. "My mother, Evelyn Clark, rented it. This is her mother, Margaret Reed. Her signature should be on file." He took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and studied it closely. Then he nodded. "I see. Let's verify the signatures and pull the access file." He motioned for us to follow him into a small office off to the side. As he scanned through the system, Grandma clasped my hand. "Your mother always said the truth would need witnesses," she murmured, almost to herself. "Even paper needs a person to vouch for it." After a few minutes, the supervisor looked up. "Everything checks out," he said. "Box B12 is still active, listed under Evelyn Clark. Since you're her daughter and she designated you as successor, you're authorized to access it." Relief hit me like a deep exhale. For the first time in days, something worked the way it was supposed to. He led us to the vault area, a long corridor of numbered boxes and a heavy steel door that opened with an echoing click. Inside, the air was cold and dry, smelling faintly of metal and ink. Grandma squeezed my hand once before letting go. "You open it," she said. I slid the key into the slot, the small brass tag catching the light just enough to remind me of its long journey from the dirt beneath the porch to this moment. It turned smoothly. The sound was soft but final. When the drawer slid open, my throat tightened. Inside lay a single manila envelope, thick with folded papers, bound by a faded blue ribbon. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "For Anna, only when the truth is needed." I didn't realize I was crying until Grandma reached up with a tissue and dabbed my cheek. "Go on, baby," she whispered. "She left it for you." I untied the ribbon and unfolded the top page, a notarized copy of her will. My hands trembled as I read her words. She had left half of the property and all personal effects to me. The remaining assets were to be shared. There were clear signatures, stamps, and the notary's seal, everything legal, undeniable. The stepfather's name was there too, but in a different light. He was executor, not owner. There were more pages, bank statements, insurance documents, and at the very bottom, a handwritten letter. The paper was soft, almost translucent from time. Anna, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stop him from twisting the story. You've always had a calm strength, use it. Don't shout to be heard, document to be believed. Let the truth do its own work. By the time I finished reading, Grandma's eyes were wet too. She took my hand again and whispered. She knew this day would come. I nodded, folding the letter back into the envelope with care. My mind was already racing, not with revenge, but with quiet strategy. I needed to copy everything, get it verified, make it untouchable. As we walked back through the main lobby, I felt taller, steadier. Every step echoed like a declaration. I had proof now, real, tangible proof. My mother's voice was no longer a fading memory. It was ink on paper, notarized and dated. Outside, the air felt warmer, and the sun caught the brass key in my hand again. Grandma leaned on my arm as we walked to the car. "You have what you need," she said softly. "Now it's time to use it wisely." I nodded, gripping the envelope close to my chest. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone returning to a broken home. I felt like someone coming to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, with grace, with patience, and with the quiet confidence that comes from holding the truth in your hands. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like it was alive, like it was breathing along with me. I drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing against it, just to make sure it was still there. The weight of it was small, but it changed everything. For years, my memories of my mother had been tangled with doubt. His words, his stories, the way he'd rewrite every fact until I started wondering if I'd imagined things. But that envelope, that faded blue ribbon, it was proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that my mother had trusted me to find my way back to the truth. When I reached the motel, I locked the door behind me, closed the blinds, and laid everything out on the table. The pages fanned across the cheap laminate like puzzle pieces of a life that had been hidden from me. I read through them one by one, bank account ledgers, property papers, a notarized copy of her will, even the insurance policy she'd signed 3 weeks before she died. My mother's handwriting appeared in small notes on the margins, reminders, arrows, little hearts. Every mark was a whisper saying, "I was thinking of you." I took pictures of each page with my phone, careful to capture every seal, every signature, every date. Then I scanned them on the printer in the motel's front office, converting them into PDFs. The clerk didn't ask questions. He just looked at the documents, then at my face, and wordlessly handed me a USB drive. "Make sure you save it twice," he said quietly. I nodded. Back in my room, I created a folder on my laptop titled EC Proofs, then copied everything onto a cloud drive and an external hard disk. I also emailed a copy to Jordan, my friend who worked as a paralegal, with a short message. "For safekeeping. I'll explain soon." Just seeing the upload bar crawl to 100% made my pulse slow. Every byte that transferred was another layer of protection. Then I sat back and just looked at the pile of originals. The manila envelope was half empty now, but it still radiated something powerful, like my mother was there in spirit, nudging me to keep going. I could almost hear her voice, calm and patient. "Don't let anger guide you. Let order do the work." That thought steadied me. I made myself a cup of coffee with the small motel machine, even though it tasted like burnt cardboard. The caffeine wasn't the point. It was the ritual. Doing something slow reminded me I was still in control. I looked at the bruise near my collarbone in the mirror, yellow now, fatting. It wasn't proof anymore. It was a reminder of what proof is for. I decided not to go straight to the police. Not yet. My stepfather was good at playing the victim. He'd twist any confrontation into another story about an emotional daughter who wanted money. No, this needed to be handled quietly, carefully. The way my mother intended. Legal first, emotional later. I called Mr. Darden, the estate attorney, again. This time he answered. His voice was warm but wary. Anna, it's been a long time. Yes, I said, and I think I've found something that belongs in your file. There was a pause. Go on. I have a notarized copy of my mother's will. It names me as partial heir, not excluded. It was stored in a safe deposit box she rented under her own name. He exhaled a long, low sound. That's surprising. Your stepfather insisted that no such copy existed. He filed a summary probate, claiming the original was lost. I know, I said. That's why I need to meet with you. We set a time for the following morning. I'd bring the documents, and he'd verify their legitimacy. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. The kind that comes when you've finally stopped surviving and started acting. Night came slowly, heavy with rain. I sat by the window, watching the drops race down the glass, each one catching a bit of neon from the motel sign outside. The sound reminded me of the night's mom, and I used to stay up during storms, wrapped in blankets, watching lightning flicker over the fields. Storms wash things clean, she'd said once. I'd never believed it until now. I didn't notice I'd fallen asleep at the table until the sound of my phone vibrating woke me. It was a message from Jordan. Got the files, backed them up. You're doing the right thing. Want me to help draft something official? I smiled at the screen, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not the kind that hides behind locked doors, but the kind that grows from knowing the truth can stand on its own. The next morning, I dressed neatly, almost formally. Black pants, white blouse, hair tied back. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. I gathered the originals, slipped them into a new envelope, and double-checked the backups. Before leaving, I placed my mother's handwritten letter into my wallet, folded so the words "Don't shout to be heard, document to be believed" showed at the top. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick with reflection. As I walked toward my car, I saw my stepfather's truck drive past on the other side of the street. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and pretended not to. Either way, I felt no rush of panic, no anger, just a strange, grounded calm. He still thought he had control. He didn't know that the next time we saw each other, I'd have the law standing beside me. I slipped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and rested my hand on the envelope once more. "Let's finish this, Mom," I whispered. The brass keychain around my wrist caught the morning light, glinting against the dashboard like a quiet promise kept. When I walked into Mr. Darden's office, the air felt still, too still. The kind of stillness that made every sound louder than it should have been. The click of my shoes against the floor, the soft shuffle of papers from the secretary's desk, the faint hum of the air conditioner. I'd been in this office before, years ago, when Mom passed. Back then, I sat in that same leather chair and listened as her husband, my stepfather, did most of the talking. He'd held my shoulder, pretending to comfort me, while subtly steering every conversation toward his authority. But this time, I wasn't here as a grieving daughter. I was here as someone who had come prepared. Mr. Darden met me in the doorway of his office, his expression tight but polite. "Anna," he said, offering a small nod. "You look so much like your mother today." I smiled faintly. "Thank you. She'd probably tell me I need more sleep." He motioned for me to sit, then gestured toward the folder I was carrying. "You said you found something." I placed the envelope on the desk, careful and deliberate. Not just something, everything. He took a moment, then opened it. As he sifted through the documents, the will, the bank statements, the insurance forms, I watched his face shift from curiosity to disbelief, then to quiet awe. "These are authentic," he murmured, tracing his finger over the notary seal. "I know this signature. I had this notary in my office 20 years ago. He passed in 2011. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Your stepfather filed a sworn statement saying the original will was lost in a flood. He submitted a simplified transfer. That allowed him to keep the property uncontested." "And that was a lie," I said softly, "because the original was never in the house. It was in a safety deposit box." He looked up at me, eyes narrowing with a kind of protective concern. "Do you have the key?" I slid it across the desk. The brass glinted in the sunlight streaming through the blinds. "It's what started all this." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then Darden gave a slow nod. This changes everything. I'll have to reopen the estate. It's going to make him very uncomfortable. I can live with that, I said. He gave me a long, searching look. You understand, once this starts, you can't take it back. It'll be public record. You'll have to sit across from him in a hearing. I nodded. I've already been across from him in worse places. That earned a small, knowing smile from the lawyer. All right, he said. Then we begin. He asked for permission to make certified copies of each document, and I agreed. While he was gone, I looked around the room, the same diplomas, the same framed photograph of his family on the beach. The world had stayed the same, even as mine had shifted completely. I could feel the tension winding in my stomach, but beneath it there was something new, a slow-burning steadiness that felt almost like peace. When he returned, he had a small folder with seals and witness statements ready for my signature. This will be filed with the clerk's office by the end of the day, he said. You'll get a copy of the official acknowledgement by tomorrow. Once that's done, your stepfather will receive a formal notice of the probate reopening. I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. So much of my life had been dictated by the things I didn't have: proof, power, voice. But here, with a pen in my hand and my mother's will beside me, I realized I was finally choosing to step into the space he'd spent years keeping me out of. I signed every line carefully, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper almost rhythmic. When I was done, Darden looked satisfied but cautious. I want you to prepare yourself, he said. He'll likely try to intimidate you, but you're doing this the right way, quietly, legally. That's what makes it unshakable. I gave a small nod, my throat tight. That's how my mother wanted it. He smiled softly. Then she raised you right. When I left the office, the afternoon light hit me full in the face. For a second, I had to stop and breathe it in. I wasn't sure if the warmth I felt was relief or exhaustion. Maybe both. I stopped by a small park across the street and sat on a bench beneath a sycamore tree. The sound of kids playing nearby was strangely grounding. I took out my phone and checked my messages, one from Jordan, another from Grandma. Jordan's text read, "Let me know when it's filed. I can help you prep for the next step." Grandma's message was shorter. "I'm proud of you. Your mother would be too. Remember, truth doesn't need to shout." I smiled to myself, staring at the brass key still sitting on my keychain. It caught the sunlight again, flashing like a signal. That key had once opened a box that held everything I didn't know I needed. Now, it felt like it was opening something else entirely, my sense of self-worth, my calm power. But even as the peace settled in, a flicker of unease surfaced. Because if the court notice went out tomorrow, he'd know. My stepfather would see my name on that paper, right next to the word petitioner. He'd know that I wasn't hiding anymore. And knowing him, he wouldn't stay silent. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept imagining the look on his face when he'd open the letter. The shock first, then the simmering anger. I pictured the way he'd lean back in his chair, jaw clenched, already rehearsing his next move. I knew it wouldn't be a phone call or a visit. No, he'd go quiet, pretend it didn't matter, until he found a way to twist it back. But for once, I was ready for that too, because this time I had paper on my side. And paper, as my mother used to say, never forgets. The letter reached him faster than I expected. I found out the next morning when my phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "You had no right." No greeting, no name, just those 4 words. I didn't need a signature. His tone was stamped between every letter. For a moment, my hands trembled, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. Then I remembered what Mr. Darden had said, quiet, legal, documented, and I took a screenshot. No reply, just evidence. A few hours later, Darden called. "He's been notified," he said flatly. He already contacted the clerk's office, demanding to know who authorized the reopening. "Let me guess," I said softly. "He called it a mistake." A faint chuckle came through the line. "Almost word for word, but the papers are valid. We're proceeding. He can contest it, but he'll need evidence, which, from what you've shown me, he doesn't have." I thanked him, then hung up and sat there, staring at the motel wall. The wallpaper had a faded floral pattern, almost invisible in the morning light, and for some reason I found myself tracing the petals with my eyes. They were worn but still there, just like me. By noon, the storm hit. Not the weather this time, him. He called Grandma. I didn't know until she rang me back, her voice unsteady. "He showed up at my house, Anna," she said. "Said you're trying to ruin the family name, that you're unstable." I closed my eyes. "Are you okay?" "Oh, I'm fine. I told him I was old, not stupid." She paused, then added, "He left in a huff when I said your mother's handwriting is as real as mine." My chest loosened at that. Grandma was stronger than he'd ever accounted for. Still, the fact that he'd gone to her meant he was getting desperate. I knew his pattern, first denial, then intimidation. But what he didn't know was that every step he took from here would be logged. Darden had already filed a notice of protection regarding witness harassment. Any contact, any threat, would be documented. That afternoon, I went to the bank again, not to the deposit box, but to meet with the records officer, a woman named Sheila who Darden had arranged for me to see. She wore a gray blazer and had the patient expression of someone used to sorting through people's messes. "We've made certified duplicates of your mother's safe deposit file," she said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "We've also attached a dated verification of rental with the access log showing who last visited. Would you like to see?" I nodded, bracing myself. The record listed 4 names: my mother, once, mine last week, 2 others in between, both listed as unauthorized attempts, dated 2 years after my mother's death. My stomach dropped. "He tried to get into it," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "Twice. Both times he was told he didn't have the authority. We filed incident notes. They're attached here." I sat back in my chair, the room tilting slightly as the weight of that realization settled. It wasn't just greed. He'd known there was something in that box, and he couldn't get to it. That explained the anger when I came back, the need to control every conversation, even the violence. He'd been guarding a lie that was now dissolving right in front of him. "Thank you," I said quietly. "This helps more than you know." On my way out, I bought a cheap folder from a stationery store and began labeling everything carefully. Will, estate proofs, access logs, harassment record. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building a case. That night, Jordan came by. She dropped her bag on the motel chair and looked around like she was inspecting a crime scene. "He's unraveling, huh?" Faster than I thought. She sat across from me, crossing her legs. "Good. Because once people like him start losing control, they always overplay their hand. Let him talk. Let him show everyone who he really is." She was right. The next day he did. He posted on Facebook a long, self-pitying message about how some ungrateful people don't know how to let the dead rest, how greed can rot even blood ties. It got a handful of sympathetic comments from people who didn't know the truth, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I made another small move. I emailed Mr. Darden a copy of the bank access logs and attached the screenshots from my stepfather's texts and posts. His reply came an hour later. "Good. Keep collecting. Every word he writes now is helping you." That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not from fear this time, but from awareness of how close I was to something irreversible. I sat by the window, watching headlights glide past in streaks of white and gold. I thought about my mother again, how she'd always told me that truth isn't loud, it's patient. It waits for the noise to collapse around it. The next morning, I woke up to another message from Grandma. "He's calling for a family meeting, says he wants to clear the air." I told him, "You decide." I stared at the text for a long time before typing my response. "Tell him I'll be there, and tell him to invite everyone." Because suddenly I understood the timing. The proof was ready. The narrative was ready. The stage, unintentionally, was being set. He thought he was calling a truce. But what he was really doing was calling an audience. Grandma's dining room hadn't changed in years. The same oak table polished to a soft shine, the lace runner down the center, the faint smell of lemon oil and old books. But that evening, when I stepped through the door, the air carried a different kind of weight. The chairs were already arranged around the table like a jury box. My stepfather was at the head, of course, leaning back like a man who thought he still owned the space. My two aunts sat side by side, whispering, their faces tight with curiosity. Grandma moved slowly between the kitchen and the table, setting down cups of coffee that nobody really wanted. He looked up when I walked in. That same smirk, the one that used to make my stomach knot when I was younger, spread across his face. "Well," he said, his voice smooth but edged, "look who finally decided to come home." I didn't answer. Instead, I set my folder on the table, right in front of him. The sound of it landing was sharper than I expected. Paper has weight when it's the truth. "I came because you wanted to clear the air," I said evenly. "So let's clear it." He laughed softly, glancing at the others. "You've caused quite the stir, you know. Lawyers calling, bank officers, clerks. All this drama for what? Some dusty papers." I met his gaze. "For my mother's words," I said. "For her wishes, for her name." Something flickered behind his eyes, something small but sharp. He didn't like that tone, the calmness. He thrived on chaos, and I wasn't giving him any. Aunt Leela leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "Honey, are you sure this is wise? Your stepfather. Done everything to keep the family together. You're bringing up old wounds." I turned to her gently. "Aunt Leela, the wounds aren't old if they never healed." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Then Grandma set down the last coffee cup and lowered herself into her seat at the far end. "Let her speak," she said quietly. That was all I needed. I opened the folder and began to lay out the pages one by one. The will, the notarized copy, the bank verification, the access log with the 2 failed attempts, the incident reports. I slid each one forward like a measured heartbeat. "I found these in Mom's safety deposit box," I said. "She left a note. She said if the truth was ever questioned, I should let the paper speak for itself." He leaned forward, his fingers drumming against the table. "And you expect anyone to believe that your mother hid her will in a bank box and told no one?" "She didn't tell you," I said. "That's different." His jaw tightened. Aunt Ruth reached for one of the pages, squinting at the signatures. "This is her handwriting," she murmured. "I remember that little curl in her ease." Grandma nodded slowly. "That's my daughter's hand, all right." He turned on her then, quick and sharp. "You're really going to take her side, after all I've done for this family." Grandma looked up at him, her voice firm but soft. "You did things for control, not for family. Don't confuse the two." The silence that followed was heavy, almost electric. You could hear the small ticks of the wall clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. I kept my hands flat on the table, steady, just the way I'd practiced. Then, in a deliberate move, I took out my phone and opened the photo of the will, the one with the seal visible, and placed it beside the printed copy. "It's verified," I said. "Mr. Darden confirmed it and filed the reopening. The court already has copies. This meeting isn't about convincing anyone. It's about letting you all know the truth is no longer in his hands." He laughed again, but it was brittle this time. "You think some lawyer can undo everything? You're naive. People remember who took care of them, who paid the bills, who kept the lights on." "People also remember who took their voice," I said quietly. That was the first time he didn't have an immediate answer. His eyes darted toward Grandma, then to the documents, then back to me. I saw it happen, the moment the mask cracked. His confidence faltered just slightly, like a wave losing its edge before breaking on the shore. He stood up suddenly, chair scraping back. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this." "You don't," I said, my tone level. "But I'd like you to hear one more thing before you go." I pulled out my mother's letter, the one I'd kept folded in my wallet. The paper was soft from being handled, the ink slightly faded, but her words were still clear. I read aloud. "If he ever tries to erase you, remember, truth is slow but unstoppable. It doesn't shout. It stands and the noise falls away." When I finished, no one said a word. Grandma's eyes glistened. My aunts looked down at the table, suddenly unable to meet my gaze. My stepfather's face had gone rigid, but there was something else there now, fear, not of me, but of exposure. I gathered the papers one by one and slid them back into the folder. "You wanted the air cleared," I said. "Now it is." As I turned to leave, Grandma reached out and touched my arm. "Wait." She looked across the table at him. "I think it's time you understand something, George. Family isn't built on fear, it's built on truth. And tonight, the truth finally came home." He didn't reply. He just stood there, fists clenched, staring at the papers like they were ghosts come to haunt him. Outside, the night was cool, the air heavy with the smell of rain. As I walked to my car, I felt my legs shaking, not from fear, but from the release of holding everything in for so long. My hands were still trembling when I reached for the door handle, but inside, there was a calm that felt almost sacred. For years, he'd made me feel small in that house. Tonight, for the first time, I'd left taller than I came. And though I hadn't raised my voice once, the truth had spoken louder than he ever could. The next morning began with silence, the kind that sits heavy before the phone starts ringing. I knew it would happen. Men like him don't disappear quietly. They try to reshape the story, and he did. By 8 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop. Aunts calling, cousins messaging. Half of them had already heard his version, that I'd ambushed the family, forged documents, and disrespected my mother's memory. The irony of that last part almost made me laugh. Almost. I ignored the noise. Instead, I went to Darden's office early, folder in hand. He looked up from his desk when I walked in, already aware. "He started the smear campaign," he said, almost like it was a weather report. "I figured," I replied, sitting down. "He always uses chaos to control the story." Darden nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Fortunately, chaos doesn't stand in court. Facts do." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "The clerk processed our filing at 7:42 this morning. It's public record now." I stared at the embossed stamp on the cover. Filed and recorded. Those 3 words felt like armor. He could twist narratives all he wanted, but the law didn't run on gossip. It ran on paper, ink, and timestamps. Still, the weight of what was coming pressed on me. "He's not going to take this quietly," I said. "No," Darden agreed, "but that's not your problem anymore. Once the hearing is set, it'll be handled under oath. All you need to do is show up, calm and factual." "Calm and factual," I repeated softly, like a mantra. When I left his office, I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. The world outside seemed louder now, the hum of traffic, a dog barking somewhere, the faint buzz of a plane overhead. Everything kept moving, indifferent to family wars or buried lies. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Grandma's. She was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, crocheting. When she saw me, she smiled, tired but proud. "He's been calling everyone," she said before I even asked. "But don't worry. People may listen to noise, but they remember tone. Yours was steady last night. His wasn't." I knelt beside her, resting my hand over hers. "Did he come back here?" She shook her head. "He tried. I didn't open the door." Her eyes twinkled with a bit of mischief. "Told him over the intercom that the sheriff advised me not to. That shut him up quick." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "You didn't talk to the sheriff, did you?" She smiled. "Not yet." That night I went home and started drafting a statement, not for social media, but for clarity. A record. I wrote it the way my mother would have. Calm, precise, factual. I detailed the timeline, the documents, the discovery of the safety deposit box. I didn't attack him or accuse him. I just told the truth as it was without heat. Jordan came over to help edit. "This isn't just a statement," she said, scanning the page. "It's an affidavit in plain clothes. Smart." We uploaded it to the cloud and sent a copy to Darden, labeling it public clarification, for record only. It wasn't for attention. It was for accountability. The next morning, I woke to a storm, not of weather, but of words. My stepfather had posted again, this time tagging local friends, insinuating that I was after what wasn't mine. But within hours, the comments began to turn. A few quiet voices started asking for proof. Someone mentioned they'd seen the public probate filing online. Another commented, if she forged something, the court wouldn't have accepted it. The tide was shifting, slowly but unmistakably. And then, the moment I didn't expect, an email from a local reporter. A short message, professional but curious. Ms. Clark, we came across recent probate activity linked to your late mother's estate. Would you like to comment? I sat staring at the screen for a long minute. My first instinct was to say no. But then I thought about my mother's letter, about Grandma's quiet courage, about the years of silence I'd endured. Maybe it was time to let the truth breathe in the open. When I called Darden, he didn't discourage it. If you do it factually. No emotion, no accusations, just receipts. Let them tell the story for you. That phrase, the receipts tell the story, stayed with me. So when I finally met the reporter, a soft-spoken woman named Lydia, I handed her copies of the verified documents and the access logs. She listened quietly as I explained everything. The will, the box, the attempts to open it, the lawyer's confirmation. When we finished, she said something that stuck with me. It's not about revenge, is it? I shook my head. No, it's about balance. My mother's truth deserves to stand, not be buried under someone else's ego. She nodded, tucking the papers into her folder. Then I'll make sure that's the story. By the end of the week, the article went live. The headline wasn't sensational. It was factual, restrained. Reopened estate reveals long-hidden Willen-Clark family dispute. The comments were cautious, but the shift was undeniable. For the first time, people were hearing my side, not filtered through his version, but through proof. That evening, I went for a walk around the block, the autumn air cool against my face. The neighborhood was quiet except for the rustle of leaves. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. As I walked, I thought of the motif that had followed me from the start, the key. It had unlocked more than a box. It had unlocked a truth that no amount of manipulation could hide again. By the time I reached the motel, I noticed a message from Grandma waiting on my phone. Your mother would have called it the turning point. I smiled. She was right. Because in every story, there's a moment when noise gives way to clarity. This was mine. And the man who once spoke the loudest was about to realize that silence, when armed with truth echoes longer. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, sterile, neutral, almost indifferent to the lives unraveling inside its walls. I stood in the hallway outside the probate courtroom, holding the folder that had followed me for weeks, the one that had become both shield and sword. Inside it, the receipts. The official kind, time-stamped, sealed, verified. He was already there, of course. My stepfather stood by the bench seats, pretending to scroll through his phone, the picture of false composure. His new wife sat beside him, lips pressed tight, pretending to comfort him while clearly waiting for a spectacle. The rest of the family lingered nearby, my aunt, a couple of cousins, each wearing the same look I'd seen since childhood, curiosity laced with judgment. When he finally looked up at me, his expression flickered. That subtle shift between irritation and fear. It lasted half a second, but I saw it. The mask cracked. I didn't say anything. Just gave him the same calm nod I'd practiced in the mirror, the kind that said, "You don't get to decide the story anymore." Then Darden appeared, carrying his briefcase with the slow, confident gait of someone who already knew how this day would end. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "I've been ready for years," I said. Inside, the courtroom was cool and quiet. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that made even the loudest people sit straighter, entered and called the case. "In the matter of the Clark estate reopening," she said, scanning the docket. "Parties present." Darden stood. "For the petitioner, Ms. Clark." My stepfather's attorney, an oily man with too much cologne and a grin that didn't reach his eyes, introduced himself. "For the respondent, Mr. Daniels." It was almost poetic, hearing him addressed formally. Mr. Daniels, no longer Dad, just another name on the docket. The first few minutes were procedural, confirming identities, reviewing filings. My heart beat in time with the judge's pen scratching across paper. Then came the part that mattered, the evidence review. Darden stood, calm and methodical. Your Honor, as outlined in the petition, we are submitting Exhibit A through G. These include bank access logs, a notarized letter from the deceased's legal counsel, the original safe deposit authorization, and the verified will discovered posthumously in said box. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents. And all have been authenticated. Yes, ma'am. We have verification from the bank and witness signatures from the original estate attorney, now retired. The opposing attorney rose, attempting a smirk. Your Honor, while we don't dispute the existence of these documents, we do question the timing and… The judge looked up. Timing is irrelevant if the chain of custody is clear, is it? Silence. Darden's lips curved almost imperceptibly. It is, Your Honor. The chain is intact from the bank to the clerk's office. The attorney sat down slowly, muttering something under his breath. Then the judge looked at me. Ms. Clark, would you like to make a statement for the record? My throat tightened. I hadn't expected her to ask, but Darden gave a small nod and something inside me steadied. I stood, clutching the key pendant at my neck, my mother's old one, the motif that had followed me all this way. I just wanted the truth to be visible, I began quietly. My mother's words, her wishes, they were put away and ignored. I don't want to fight for money. I just want what she actually left behind to be honored. Nothing more, nothing less. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Even the air seemed to pause. The judge nodded slowly. Understood. She turned back to the attorneys. The documents are admissible and valid. The will stands as genuine. She set her pen down. This court orders the estate to be reopened under the original directives of the decedent, Ms. Elaine Clark. My stepfather's face drained of color. It was like watching a facade collapse in real time. The quiet man who'd controlled so much through intimidation, who had turned fear into leverage, suddenly looked small. He tried to speak, his voice cracking. This is ridiculous, that woman. The judge's gavel struck once. Sir, I advise you to remain silent unless addressed. That single sound, the strike of authority, was like the final punctuation on years of manipulation. Darden thanked the court, gathered the documents, and gave me a look that said everything words didn't need to. It was done. When we stepped outside, the hallway buzzed with low whispers. My aunt avoided eye contact. My cousins looked stunned. Even the air seemed lighter, like a window had finally been opened in a long-closed room. Grandma was waiting near the exit, her cane in one hand, her posture straight as ever. When she saw me, her eyes glistened. "You did it," she whispered. I hugged her gently. We did. She leaned back to look at me. "Your mother's proud. I can feel it." For the first time in a long time, I believed that. As we walked out of the courthouse, Darden handed me a copy of the ruling. "Keep this safe," he said. "You earned every word of it." I looked down at the embossed seal, the official stamp, the date. Proof, not just of inheritance or legality, but of something bigger, validation. We stepped into the sunlight, and I realized something simple but profound. The law doesn't always heal the wounds people cause, but sometimes it closes the wound enough to let the truth breathe. Behind us, I heard the courthouse doors swing open and close again. My stepfather's voice echoed faintly, arguing with his attorney, his tone brittle and desperate. I didn't turn around. Because there was nothing left to win. I already had the only thing that mattered, the truth, witnessed and written. And in that moment, the air tasted like freedom, quiet, lawful, and long overdue. The days after the ruling felt strange, like I was living in a world that hadn't quite caught up with the truth yet. Everywhere I went, there was a kind of hush, the uneasy quiet that follows an earthquake before people realize the ground has settled. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even sleep much. I just breathed differently. The courthouse order was official, but fallout travels slower. My stepfather, stripped of control, started reaching for new ways to regain it. He sent emails, long, rambling things filled with half apologies and half threats, written at 2 a.m. and full of typos. Then came the messages from relatives trying to mediate, as if truth was something you could bargain with. One cousin texted, "Maybe just let him keep the house. It's not worth the tension." I stared at the screen, amazed at how quickly people translate accountability into drama. It wasn't about the house. It was about the record, the name, the legacy. My mother's voice deserved permanence, not compromise. When I met Darden to go over next steps, he noticed the exhaustion in my face. "Fallout's normal," he said gently. "They've lost power, so they'll test the boundaries of your calm. Don't engage. Let the paper speak." He handed me another copy of the ruling, this one certified. "You don't have to prove it twice," he added. "It's public record now." That night, I sat at the kitchen table in Grandma's house. She insisted I move in temporarily until things settled, though we both knew what she really meant was she wanted me close. She was stirring tea when she asked, "Did he call?" I nodded. A few times I didn't answer. "Good." She slid a mug toward me, steam curling like breath between us. Men like that thrive on reaction. Silence terrifies them. I smiled faintly. "You sound like Darden." "I sound like someone who's lived long enough to know what peace costs." Outside, the sun was setting, and through the lace curtains, I could see the reflection of the yard. The same one where I'd played as a kid, where my mother once planted lilies along the fence. I hadn't noticed them before, but they were still there, yellow and stubborn, pushing up through the dirt. That image stayed with me, the lilies. Unbothered by who owned the deed, unafraid of gossip or inheritance disputes, just blooming because that's what they were meant to do. 2 days later, the article was updated. Lydia, the reporter, had written a follow-up. "Probate court upholds late mother's original will. Legal experts cite integrity of chain of custody." It was measured, factual, and final. The court's ruling was now part of the public record, irrefutable, permanent. I didn't share it online. I didn't have to. People found it anyway. The calls and texts began to quiet. The ones who doubted me shifted to polite neutrality. A few even offered quiet congratulations, the kind that carries guilt beneath the words. Then came the practical consequences. The property transfer was formalized. My mother's house, the one he'd been claiming for years, was legally mine. When the deed arrived in the mail, I sat on the porch with Grandma, both of us tracing the embossed lettering with our fingers. "Feels heavier than paper, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Yeah," I murmured. "It feels like proof you can hold." That night I went to the house alone. It was quiet, still heavy with the echo of his presence, but no longer haunted. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls like reacquainting myself with a memory. In the kitchen drawer, I found the same old spoon with a dent in it, the one Mom used every morning. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Then, as I passed through the hallway, I noticed the small brass hook by the door, the one that used to hold my mother's keys. It was empty now, but the light hit it in such a way that it glowed faintly. The key motif, returning again. A reminder that what once locked me in had become the thing that set me free. Outside, I heard footsteps. My pulse quickened just for a second. When I turned, I saw him, standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He didn't step closer, just called out, "You really think you've won?" I met his eyes through the porch light's haze. "No," I said evenly. "I think the truth did." He laughed, bitter and hollow, but he didn't move closer. "You'll regret this." I took a deep breath. Maybe, but I won't regret standing up. There was a long silence between us, years worth of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, he turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, muttering to himself. I waited until he disappeared around the corner before locking the door. The click echoed like punctuation. Final, clean, absolute. When I returned to Grandma, that night she was still awake, reading by the lamp, I told her what happened. She didn't flinch. "He'll keep trying to make noise," she said calmly. "But it doesn't matter. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to exist." Her words settled deep in me. She was right. Truth, once written and witnessed, doesn't fade. It becomes part of the record, part of the air. I sat down beside her, the quiet between us warm and full. On the table lay the deed, folded neatly, next to my mother's photo. The two pieces of my life, past and present, finally in the same frame. And for the first time since stepping off that plane, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that makes it make sense. Because every receipt, every letter, every quiet act of resolve had led here, to this still moment where the noise had finally run out of places to hide. The morning after he came to the house, I woke to sunlight cutting through the curtains, soft, forgiving, almost like the world was giving me permission to rest. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to tension sitting on my chest. My phone was silent, no missed calls, no late-night messages filled with guilt or manipulation, just stillness. But peace, I was learning, isn't passive. It's something you have to defend with boundaries. That day, I met with Darden again, this time not to fight, but to finalize. We sat in his office surrounded by files that had once represented fear, but now looked like closure stacked neatly in paper form. He reviewed a few lingering details, the distribution of the estate, the timeline for the title transfers, the next probate check-in. When he finished, he leaned back and studied me. "So," he said, "now that it's done, what do you want?" It caught me off guard. No one had asked that in years, not what I owed, not what I had to do, but what I wanted. I thought for a moment, tracing the edge of the desk. I want to live without waiting for the next apology that doesn't mean anything, and I want to honor my mother the right way. He nodded. "Then make that your condition." "Condition?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Every resolution has one. You've already granted grace. You didn't destroy him when you could have, but grace without boundaries is just surrender. So what's the line you're drawing?" The line, I could almost see it in my head. That afternoon, I drafted a letter. Not an emotional one, not even personal. It was written in the same quiet, lawful tone that had carried me this far. It stated that I would not pursue damages or back payments, provided there were no further attempts to contact or interfere. That any communication about the estate would go through the attorney only. That grandma was to be left alone. When Darden read it, he smiled. Perfect, firm, clear, and kind, the kind of grace that has teeth. We mailed it by certified post. I watched the clerk stamp the envelope, the ink drying dark and final. That evening, I found Grandma in her garden again, pruning her roses. The light was golden, washing everything in quiet peace. She looked up and asked, "Did you send it?" "Yeah," I said. "He'll get it tomorrow." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Sometimes mercy looks like a fence, not an open door." I sat on the porch steps, listening to the rustle of her shears in the bushes. "Do you think he'll listen?" "No," she said softly, "but it doesn't matter. The point isn't whether he respects it, the point is that you do." She was right, of course. For so long, I'd lived reacting to his moods, his control, his rewriting of reality. Now, for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was defining. Later that week, his lawyer responded with a curt acknowledgement. Mr. Daniels accepts the terms as presented. No apology, no closure in words, just compliance. But that was enough. It was strange how quiet life became once the noise was legally forbidden to reach me. The phone stayed silent. The mail was normal. The nights were, finally, uneventful. I began to reclaim small things. I repainted my mother's house, one room at a time. I brought Grandma over for tea and showed her the sunroom I'd turned into a reading nook. She smiled, touching the window frame. "She'd love what you've done here," she whispered. And maybe that's what grace really was, not forgiving someone who didn't deserve it, but choosing to keep building beauty in places they tried to destroy. A few weeks later, I received one last envelope. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. His. I debated opening it for hours. When I finally did, I found a single sentence. I didn't mean for it to go this far. No signature, no explanation, just that. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the note in the same folder with the rest of the documents. The will, the deeds, the bank logs, proof of everything. The note didn't change the truth. It just became another artifact in the archive of what had already been proven. As I closed the folder, I realized something. Justice had already been served, but peace was still a daily choice. The kind that didn't need a courtroom or applause, just quiet conviction. That night before bed, I hung my mother's key on the brass hook by the door, the one that had been empty all those years. It caught the porch light and glowed softly, steady, certain. For the first time, it didn't symbolize what was locked or hidden. It stood for what was now safe, what was finally mine to protect, not reclaim. And as I turned off the light, I understood what Darden meant. Grace wasn't about letting go of justice. It was about keeping your peace sacred enough to guard it. That was the real victory. The day the house officially transferred into my name, I went there alone. The air felt different this time, lighter, somehow expectant. The realtor had left the keys under the mat, though I already had my own. That simple act, bending down and lifting the mat, felt like closing a loop. Years of fear, silence, and anger, all of it leading to this moment where the lock turned and the door opened without resistance. Inside, the light filtered through the curtains like memory itself, soft, familiar, hesitant to intrude. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, the scent of cedar and thyme still lingering in the walls. The place wasn't grand or impressive, it was simply ours. My mother's handwriting still marked the inside of the pantry door, little notes about baking times and favorite recipes. Don't overmix the batter. Add a pinch of nutmeg always. Her voice lived in those details. I walked room to room quietly, taking it all in. Every doorway carried an echo. The scuff marks near the stairs from when I dragged my backpack up as a kid. The dent in the hallway where my stepfather had once slammed his hand too hard into the wall. The wallpaper my mother had chosen, tiny blue flowers faded to silver now. It all told the truth, even when no one had wanted to hear it. I carried a box with me, small but heavy, filled with the things that had survived. Her letters, the official ruling, the notarized receipts. All of it was proof, not just of legality, but of endurance. I set the box down on the kitchen counter, where sunlight made the papers gleam faintly. Then I unlocked the back door and stepped into the yard. The lilies were in full bloom now, tall and defiant. Grandma had been right, they didn't care who claimed the soil. They bloomed anyway. I knelt beside them, running my fingers along one of the petals, and whispered, "We made it, Mom." A breeze stirred the wind chime above the porch, the one that had been silent for years. It made a low, trembling sound, almost shy at first, then stronger. It was as if the house itself was exhaling. That afternoon, Grandma came by with a small cake and her favorite tea set wrapped in an old cloth. "Every home needs a proper beginning," she said simply. I helped her up the steps, and she settled into her old chair by the window, the same one she'd sat in during the hearing. "You keeping it?" she asked, glancing around. "For now," I said. "It feels like the right kind of quiet." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. The right kind of quiet means peace, not avoidance." We ate cake on mismatched plates and talked about ordinary things, the weather, the neighbor's new dog, the church bazaar next weekend. It felt normal, and normal felt miraculous. Later, after she'd left, I stood in the doorway watching the sunset filter through the trees. That was when I saw him again, not in person, but in my mind, the image of him standing outside weeks ago, furious and small. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. It was something I could give myself. The forgiveness wasn't for his sake. It was to free me from carrying the weight of every memory he'd tried to twist. I pulled out my mother's old letter from the box. It was yellowed and fragile, the handwriting delicate. I'd read it dozens of times before, but that evening, the words struck differently. "If you ever feel lost, remember, truth will hurt before it heals, but it always leads home." Home, that word didn't sting anymore. It fit again. As night fell, I turned on the porch light, the same bulb that had burned out years ago and never been replaced. The glow spread across the yard, reaching the lilies, the fence, the path leading back to the street. A small, steady light. The neighborhood was quiet. No one knew what had unfolded behind those walls, and they didn't need to. The world didn't stop spinning for our pain, but it had made room for our peace. That was enough. I locked the door gently, then hung the key back on the hook by the entrance. The same key I'd carried through airports, lawyers' offices, and courtrooms now rested where it belonged. The brass caught the glow from the porch light again, that same soft shimmer I'd seen the day the truth first came to light. For the first time in years, the key didn't feel heavy. It felt like belonging. I sat by the window until the sky went dark, listening to the night sounds, the distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of a car passing by, the wind brushing against the old siding. Ordinary things, beautiful in their simplicity. And somewhere inside that calm, I knew the story wasn't ending, it was just shifting. From survival to stability, from silence to strength. Because sometimes, justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a door closing softly behind you as you choose peace and mean it. It's been months now since that day in court, and life has become quiet in the way I used to dream about. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from hiding, but from being done with running. Every morning I wake up to sunlight filtering through the same curtains my mother hung years ago, and for the first time in forever, I don't flinch at the sound of my own thoughts. The house breathes again. I can feel it. The floors no longer creak like they're afraid of what footsteps will come next. The walls don't hold tension, only history. Sometimes I find myself just standing in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, listening to the ticking of the old clock Mom loved. The same sound that once filled the silence after her voice was gone now feels like company. I've kept everything simple. I teach remotely now, mostly literature classes, and I write in the evenings by the window. Grandma visits often. She insists on bringing groceries I don't need and stories I never tire of. She always sits in her chair by the window, her tea steaming beside her, and watches the street like she's guarding the peace we built. Every so often, she says something that stays with me long after she leaves. Like last week, she looked at me and said, "You know, child, peace doesn't mean nothing ever happens. It means you finally know what to do when it does." And she's right. Because life hasn't turned perfect, it's just become honest. A few weeks ago, I drove by the motel where I'd stayed when I first came home, the place I hid after the first confrontation. The sign still flickers, the same broken letters spelling out vacancy. But it doesn't hold the same weight. I parked across the street for a minute, remembering the version of myself who sat behind that curtain, bruised but determined. She didn't know how this would end, only that it had to. I whispered a quiet thank you to her before driving away. Sometimes I still get small ripples of the past, people from town who recognize me, a distant relative sending a hesitant message, a rumor trickling back through someone's cousin. But none of it sticks anymore. The court order, the documents, the truth, they all exist, untouched, doing their silent work. I don't have to defend myself. The record does it for me. One evening, while sorting through a box of old things, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a small envelope, wedged behind the lining of my mother's jewelry case. Inside was a folded note, written in her handwriting. "For when you finally come home." I had to sit down before reading the rest. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "You will grow into your strength quietly, not loudly. You will be the kind of woman who lets truth speak for her. Don't rush it. Let it bloom like lilies, slow, stubborn, and certain." I cried then, not the kind of crying that hurts, but the kind that releases you. Because somehow, even gone, she had seen this moment before I had. The lilies in the yard, the legal victory, the silence reclaimed, it was all written in her faith. That night I went outside barefoot, the grass cool beneath my feet. The lilies were still standing tall, swaying lightly in the breeze. I touched one, remembering her words. Slow, stubborn, and certain. The moon hung high above, calm and unjudging. I thought about how small the world felt when I first stepped off that plane, how heavy everything seemed. And now here I was, standing in the same soil that once held my fear, finally unburdened. I picked one lily, carefully, and brought it inside. I placed it in a small glass vase on the windowsill beside the key that had started everything. The brass glimmered in the moonlight, the flower leaning gently toward it. One symbol of what was locked, the other of what had bloomed. It felt like the right kind of symmetry. Before bed, I opened my laptop to record a message, something I'd been meaning to do. Not a dramatic retelling, just a reflection. I spoke softly into the camera. If you've ever felt small in your own home, if someone made you believe silence was safety, I want you to know it's not. The truth isn't loud, it's consistent. And once you choose it, even quietly, it changes everything. You don't have to fight to be heard forever. Sometimes you just have to document the truth, protect it, and wait. The right people and the right justice will find their way to it. I paused, letting that sit in the air before finishing. And when peace finally comes, guard it with boundaries. Grace doesn't mean letting people back in, it means letting yourself move forward. I saved the video, not sure yet if I'd ever share it publicly. Maybe someday. Maybe it would help someone else stand up quietly, too. When I turned off the light, the room glowed faintly from the moonlight outside. The key and the lily reflected side by side on the glass, their shapes blurred but inseparable. And that's when I realized the story wasn't about revenge or inheritance or even justice anymore. It was about restoration, about coming home to myself. The key no longer symbolized what was stolen. It symbolized what I'd finally claimed: peace, truth, and the right to never explain either again. As I lay down, I whispered a final thought into the darkness. Not a prayer, not a wish, but a promise. I'm home now, Mom, for good. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and the chime on the porch answered back. A single, steady note that faded into the quiet night.